everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers, Josh and Dan, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things quizzical, because we're going to have like email palooza, another umpteen, 20, 30, I don't know, whatever. I've lost count. I don't even care anymore. But we're going to pick Josh's brain on this one. And I'm going to be doing a lot of talking because we got some long emails. So if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line like these fine folks did at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. First one up, we have the other half of Lehman's email that he sent us a while ago where we just did the character death portion. We have his other questions to finally ask Josh now. Hello, Josh and Dan. About a year ago, the Earthdawn game I was in went on hiatus due to a bit of Game Master burnout, which, as a Game Master for other systems, I completely understand. I offered to Game Master a different game if the Earthdawn game wouldn't fade away into nothingness. So my game finally reached a conclusion and we've gotten back into Earthdawn. I have been listening to the excellent podcast during that time, but recently a few thoughts came to mind to send to you. 1. For the Game Masters who worry about a player who has bar save knowledge that outstrips them, I would suggest that you might use, quote, "This is a parallel bar save. Some things may be the same as you know, and other things may be different," end quote. This obviously happened officially with many, of the second edition things not occurring or occurring in a different manner. There is no reason why you have to stick to everything, especially if you do publish adventures where your group has a different end result than what was official or canon. The game I developed for has this as canon where the official material is just one Earth being invaded with an infiniverse of canon but not official settings. Each Game Master table is different and canon. Thoughts, Josh?
Yeah. The whole purpose of what we do, or what I try to do when it comes to development of material, and the purpose of canon within that is more to provide a good starting point for people to develop and make the setting their own for their own home game, but also to provide a common starting point for discussions about the setting and the game and things that happen in it. So that when there is a question about lore, it is easy-ish to state this is what is said in the books versus this is what is going on. And I've mentioned in the past how I don't think that it is worthwhile to provide answers to every setting, mystery, and question that exists. It's important to leave areas for game masters to be creative and to make the game that they're running their own. And it's all cool. There's the notorious story on the Facet Discord about the group that ended up with a mantis spirit and a big destructive energy weapon of sorts that ended up destroying a significant portion of Travar. Obviously, that is not something that is going to be part of a source book of ours, but it's really cool to hear how people make things their own. I am pretty sanguine about all of it, given my own experience in the past where I came up with something in an Earthdawn game that I was running very early in the line's history. I think I may have mentioned this before, where I put a significant town at the junction of the Serpent and Kokovic rivers, only to find out when the Serpent River book was released further down the line that you had House Sirtis and a major canyon very close to that part of the river.
Yeah.
And so, there are going to be things that are different. There are going to be things that later supplements might take a different tack or contradict something that you might have come up with on your own. And that's okay. It's ultimately all idea material to inspire you and to provide a starting point, because I find myself, it's a lot easier for me to be creative and come up with stuff if I have a structure and guidelines and ideas already in place.
Fair enough. So, Lehman's second point. I'd like to propose an option for game masters who want to have characters be able to fight against hordes without rolling tons and tons of separate attacks. Break it down into squads or groups of minions. Take a stat block and increase the steps by 1 for each threat in the group. Have their attack be a group attack. Have each person in the group also be a wound. A wound lowers the number of individuals by 1, drops things down a step as normal. Do the last wound and all the minions are taken out. Unconsciousness might mean that the remaining group runs off, surrenders, etc. In games with exploding dice, having 7 minions attack separately has a higher chance for an explosion than having a mob, which does 1 attack, but at a higher step. This would cut down on the dice rolls, allows the characters to fight larger groups without slowing down gameplay. There is a trade-off where the group attack is more of a lump concept instead of a tracking every sword swung, but it might be something a game master could use.
Yeah, he pretty much described one of the masks that is in either Iopos or in Empty Thrones. I think it appeared in one of those books. There's a pack mask or a squad mask or something like that that allows you to do a group of lower-powered enemies as a single stat block, and it does that similar kind of thing in terms of a wound removes a member of that group, and when they have suffered enough wounds, or, something along those lines, pretty sure that's where that appears somewhere. If it's not there, it almost certainly was on Panda Gaming Grove.
Fair. Last question from Lehman, because he does ask one. I hope to have an interview with Greg Gorden in the near future. Is there anything Earthdawn related you'd like me to ask him for you?
No, nothing comes to mind, to be honest. No. I'm sure I would have a fascinating conversation with him if I were to sit down with him or to have a call or interview or something like that with him.
Yeah.
But put on the spot like this, I can't think of anything that is a burning question for Greg. I mean, maybe some thoughts about whether the mechanical design of the step system in first edition, whether the insights and the conclusions that I drew from my analysis of that, whether they were accurate in terms of what he was trying to do. That's probably the one thing that I would be most interested in hearing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then go to my website, loremerchant.com. There is a step-by-step
breakdown
article, I think is the name of it, that's got multiple pieces that talks about the original step system and some analysis that I did and some conclusions that I drew as a result of it. That would probably be the biggest thing, would be to see if he agreed with my conclusions.
Was going for.
What he was going for with that.
Yeah. My only question is, which of the dice steps does he like the best? First edition, his. Third edition, which was heavily on D12s, or the revised for fourth? That's my only question. If he has a preference. Or if he's even playing at all.
I would be surprised if he's actually playing, but I don't know.
I know.
Well, I wouldn't ask him that question, to be honest.
Fair. I would, just because I'm curious. Because when you create something, you want to see how somebody else modified it, and if you're beholden to yours still, or, things like that. That's all. It's a curiosity because I had no input on any of those. All right. Hello from Australia. This is from Brad. I am not going to butcher an Australian accent. I'm sorry about that. So just
thank you.
You're welcome. G'day, guys. My name is Brad, and I have been a long-time listener and a long-time Earthdawn player. My first getting into it when I saw the hardcover first edition player's guide in my local gaming store around 1994. In that time, I have run several games and played in several. I am currently running a 4th edition game, and I love what the team has done with the system. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Kyle. Else. Thank you, everybody else. And Carl and Michael. Don't want to feel like I'm leaving anybody out. And Andy.
Yes. I was interested in the player death episode because I have a few stories to share and some questions to ask. I played in my friend Simon's game, who is an amazing game master, but a very let the chips fall where they may type of game master. I originally played a human archer who started a little after the other players. During the Infected adventure, we got into a really dire position against Molta and her crew that was looking to be a total party wipe. I wasn't really feeling the archer, so I asked the Game Master if I could use the Dying Act rules to turn the tide. My archer used one of his arrows to infuse it with blood magic and shot it at Molta. It was enough to incapacitate her, and the party survived. This led to Bloodrot, our troll nethermancer, taking possession of a certain item, no spoilers, that Molta had on her possession. And instead, I created a Tiskrang swordmaster named Lagripos, who is still my favorite character to this day. He ended up getting to around 6th circle, following the Blade Master path, and also being a Lightbearer, so he was an absolute horror-killing machine. Him and the Nethermancer, Bloodrot, did not see eye to eye on things, but they both knew each other was committed to destroying horrors, even if Bloodrot would be more ends justify the means than Lagripos. The party ended up coming to a sticky end when we ended up in Parlength, and we took on the Abomination adventure from Parlength Adventures book. We got into the final fight with the horror, and Lagripos' hatred for horrors got the better of him, and he jumped in with the Lightbearer-infused dual swords at the ready. He did an ungodly amount of damage to the horror, which caused the Game Master to turn the horror's attention on him. The horror used Thoughtworm and made Lagripos turn on his allies. He attacked Bloodrot, being the character he had the most angst against, and Bloodrot opted to use a certain power from a certain item to defend himself. Unfortunately, he failed his roll, and being injured, Lagripos ended up killing him. The party ended up being fairly decimated, an additional death, and due to Lagripos' being a Lightbearer, I opted to play it so it was too much for him to bear, and he ran into Parlength ruins, his mind broken. We decided to finish the campaign at that point, and we moved on to Shadowrun instead. 20 years real-time later, and 10 years bar-save time later, I have started a 4th edition game, and I have decided to bring Lagripos back as a protagonist. Broken, encrypted by the ruins of Parlength, but still very powerful and charismatic in his own dark way. He now has a new agenda, and following that, the players will become involved with. I won't go into too much detail unless my players listen to this, but I am quite excited about using threads of a game I played into a game I am running as a game master. Which brings me to my questions. 1. There was only 2. 1. One thing you didn't cover in the episode is how to handle a new replacement character if one dies from a legend point of view. I don't like the idea of having a Circle 1 character in a group of higher Circle characters, as it feels like there would be a degree of babysitting and could exacerbate the bad feelings of losing a character. I was thinking maybe they could round down to the start of the current Circle, or a certain legend point milestone or something. What are your thoughts on that, and how have you handled that in the past?
I thought we did talk about that.
I think we covered that a little bit too, yeah. Did you not finish the episode? Like, get to the end of it? We kind of covered that.
But no, generally I agree, especially the higher the circle of the surviving player characters, the less fun it might be for a new player, for a new character to come in with a brand new first circle starting from scratch character.
Yeah.
Because the difference is pretty notable, especially if you're looking at tier differences, like if the group is 5th or 6th circle, coming in with a brand new novice Circle 1 character. There's just going to have to be a lot of punches pulled or special effort being made to make sure that you are not killing the new character before they have a chance to sort of get caught up. And so, yeah, I would probably just award a fixed number of legend points, either the same number that the previous character had or something fairly close to that, maybe rounding it off to some even 1,000 or whatever based on what the total is, and just allow them to make it and get caught up. The one consideration I would think in terms of the numbers that you use is that the new character will likely, I mean, you can do this, but by default won't necessarily have like the full stable of thread items or other supplemental stuff that they might have been investing legend points in. So they might not need quite as much in order to get to the same talent ranks and whatnot. But yeah, absolutely. I would try and give them legend points to spend after they made the initial character to be mostly caught up to the other group. I know that that's what I did with Dora, the replacement character for Bearclaw, when Bearclaw died. Yeah, I know we talked about that.
Yeah, we did.
Talked about that story. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely valid and a wise consideration. I mean, it depends on your game, and there are different ways that you can handle it otherwise, but yeah, that's a good starting point.
Totally. Question number 2 from Brad. Speaking of Lightbearers, are there any plans to bring this back as a path? Anyway, keep up the great work. Love the pod. Cheers, Brad.
Nothing really, no. I remember when we were doing the initial discussions and whatnot that led to the development of the path mechanics and the path framework and how that all worked. The early discussions about that, the Lightbearers were brought up as an example of an organization that would work really well as a path. But there isn't really a need. Well, no, I wouldn't say that. Because I know that a lot of people are sort of interested in them. Mm-hmm. The Lightbearers within the published material of the game don't really have much of a presence. They've got a little bit. They've got that breakdown of their abilities in the original Earthdawn Companion. There's an NPC in the Thrall book that I believe is specifically called out as being a Lightbearer. Or maybe it's in the GM booklet for the Bar Save campaign box. Mm-hmm. There's like 1 or 2 NPCs early on that sort of get called out as Lightbearers, but they do not end up being anything that really shows up as being involved in greater events. Aside from a couple of NPCs that are mentioned as being Lightbearers, it's not like the Exploratory Force. It's not like the Life Rock Rebellion. You know, the Lightbearers do not appear in Secret Societies of Barsave, for example.
Yeah.
They feel like they were an organization that was created with the idea of this is a group, this is a guild, this is an organization, this is a society that it would make sense for player characters to be involved with and potentially join. Mm-hmm. But they ended up not really having much of a presence within the published setting material. And similar to the Invi, in the player base, there seems to be a much greater influence in terms of home games where they appear than myself. Like, the Lightbearers are fine. I think there are some potential issues with their abilities as presented in the first edition book. And I think the path framework would work really well for them, but I'm not particularly interested in exploring that, and nobody else has either. There are other groups or organizations that fulfill kind of a similar role, or aspects of roles that the Lightbearers kind of took over. I mean, you've got the Purifiers, you've got the Messengers, you've got the Horror Stalkers, like all of these kind of play in different themes of the Lightbearers. I don't know. I'll be honest. I have not looked at the first edition abilities for the Lightbearers that were there originally. And so I'm not sure how much of what's there would be useful for 4th edition.
Fair.
I don't know.
No need to revisit it right now anyway. More than likely. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We have actually an email from Scott. Greetings, Dan and Josh. Dan needs some love, so I'm giving him top billing. I'm reading that. That's not my ego. That's from Scott. I can forward you the email. I'm teasing. I was listening to episode 191 on player character death, and it brought back a lot of memories. So I thought I would share 2 of them. Back in the day, like 40 years ago, I was playing regularly with a group. We called it D&D, but really we were just using it as a rule system and making up our own worlds and settings for the most part. Back then, character death was a common occurrence. In fact, it was not unusual to lose 1 or 2 characters each game session, usually to a bad case of terminal stupidity and other shenanigans. We always honored the dice gods and did not believe in fudging rolls. The dice giveth, and they taketh away. And we dealt with the consequences accordingly. We also used things like critical hit table and other fun tools to increase the lethality some more. However, we still always gave character death the respect it deserved and didn't take such things lightly. We rotated dungeon masters all the time, and at one point my friend Chad was the dungeon master and decided to use a Ravenloft module. I wish I could remember the name of the module, but it escapes me after this many years. The module was supposedly for characters levels 1 through 4. Chad had everyone make a first-level character, and we had a nice, well-rounded group, including support characters like a bard, thief, cleric, etc. About 5 pages into the module, total party kill. Chad was a bit flustered and said, okay, everybody make a second-level character, and we started again. This time, we jettisoned the more squishy characters in favor of more hearty ones and set out again. About 5 more pages into the module, another total party kill. Chad says, everybody make a third-level character? Now the party is pretty much fighters and barbarians. We got farther this time, maybe an additional 10 pages, and this time, not a total party kill, but very, very close. My dwarven fighter, who I ended up nicknaming Stumpy, only had about 10% of his hit points left and had lost an arm. Rot grubs can be nasty. But he was still alive. Chad says, deep sigh this time, okay, let's try 4th-level characters. This time we managed to get nearly to the end of the module, reaching the climactic scene at the end, when out of a bright light emanating from the floor comes a lich. The whole party screams things like, a lich? Are you kidding me? At this point, Chad really stepped up. The lich appears, goes into a monologue of how we had disrupted his plans, and that it would claim all our souls later, and disappears. The last part was not in the module, but props to Chad for his quick thinking. On our way back out of the castle, bruised, battered, bloody, and beaten, we ran into a band of about 15 orcs. We are all grumbling, and Chad says, look, they're just puny little orcs. Just slaughter them, we can wrap this up. We take heart in that, and our barbarian steps forward to crack some skulls. The first orc to attack rolls a 20. Oh yeah, did I mention we were using the critical hit table? Out come the percentile dice. Chad rolls and gets 100. Decapitation. Tiny little orc that only comes up to the barbarian's kneecaps leaps up and cleaves his head off in one stroke. The rest of the party screams in terror and flees for their lives while Chad says, but they're just normal orcs, I swear. We were past the point of caring. As bloody as that module was, remains one of my favorite stories to this day.
It's a great story. I have nothing to add. Dan watched the emotions that played across my face as that story was being told. The dip of the head and the shake when we left and we ran into some orcs and he was just like, oh, they're normal orcs. I'm like, this is not going to go well.
This doesn't end well. Not at all. My least favorite character death was, oddly enough, in a game of Paranoia at Gen Con. This one is an example of why a session 0 is a good thing. I had never played the game before, and some of my friends had talked me into it. I had no idea how lightly death is taken in that game, and the tons of backstabbing that occurs. And it really ticked me off. It was easily my least favorite game of all time. By the end of it, my new clones would show up and just start attacking the others and wreaking as much havoc as possible. Not a good time. Some forewarning on what the game was like might have gone a long way for me. So the upshot for me on PC death is this. I do think it should be part of the game. Actions should have consequences, but it should be given the respect and drama that it deserves. Really enjoyed the podcast as always. Scott.
Yeah, we talked about Paranoia in the character death episode. That is a game that I am a big fan of, but yes, is absolutely one that requires player character buy-in from the group and a discussion about the nature and style of the humor that is going to be involved in it, because there are a couple of different ways that you can play that game. It is possible to play it as a very black humor, catch-22 kind of situation. It's also possible to play it as a glorified Looney Tunes cartoon. The full range of things in between. Different people have different feelings about various editions based on which type of humor they prefer and generally which edition they were introduced to. Earlier editions tended to be a little bit darker and playing it more quote-unquote straight in the sense that it is still funny and a comedy game in a way, but in a sort of more serious black humor, like Brazil, if you think of the Terry Gilliam film, something along those lines is like one style that you could play.
Yeah.
Where like you recognize that it is a very dark dystopian kind of setting and really leaning into the absurdity that can arise out of something like that. Or you could have the kind of situation where, a new clone shows up and, things just go kind of bananas and whatnot.
Yeah.
Great game, but absolutely one that requires people to be on the same page when it comes to playing it. Because humor is even more personal and subjective than horror. So it can be very difficult to strike the right balance, the right tone for the group when you're playing in a game that's like that.
Agreed. Most of the games you have to have a little buy-in on the setting, the scenery, the mood, the atmosphere.
Yeah. I personally think that Paranoia, for me personally anyway, that Paranoia is probably better if you tend to lean it more in the straighter, dark comedy aspect of things rather than being gonzo with it. But that's because I feel that humor and whatnot is a useful pressure valve when things are getting tense.
Yeah.
And if you have a game that is always at that meta gonzo level, there's nowhere for it to go. And that it very rapidly devolves into just kind of stupidity.
Slapstick.
Yeah, because there are, in a sense, no consequences. There's no reality to it anymore. But that's just me. I tend to prefer sort of darker humor. I think that comedy is a lot better played straight, that it's from the situations and the characters dealing with strange situations as opposed to mugging for the camera.
Yeah.
I much prefer, say, Jim Carrey's performance in The Truman Show, which is still funny, but it is a darker, more straight, serious. That's a movie that does take advantage of his abilities, but he's not a cartoon character in the way that you have in, say, Ace Ventura or The Mask or something like that, which are also... The Mask is a solid movie, but I just prefer, or you look at somebody like Robin Williams, who did a couple of dramatic roles.
Bunch of them, yeah.
And, like his performance in Dead Poets Society, for example, takes advantage of his...
Good Will Hunting.
Masterful. Yeah, takes advantage of his comic abilities, but plays it straight, that it's not a movie opportunity to indulge in his stand-up.
Yeah, exactly.
Again,
totally.
That is my personal feeling on such things.
Little Paranoia sidebar for you there, which is okay. Which is what we're here for. We have a follow-up email from the same Scott. Hey, Josh and Dan. Whoa. I don't get first billing on the second email. Is that what this is?
He's just balancing things out.
He's being fair. I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with that. I'm just teasing you, Scott. It's all right. I am thinking about running Earthdawn at a local convention next year. It will likely be a brand new system for the players, so I had some questions. I plan on having a good mix of pre-gens available for the game. Are there any disciplines I should avoid in terms of complexity?
Well, let me talk about what I do when I am prepping for conventions, because I have done that a lot.
I figured that's why he wrote in.
Yeah. I generally create 8 pre-generated characters. It will usually be a mix of disciplines. I generally provide one of each name-giver race. So there will be a human, an elf, a dwarf, a troll, an orc, a windling, a Tiskrang, and an obsidian. There will be one of each.
Yeah.
I will juggle up the disciplines for the most part. I won't always make the pairing between the race and discipline the stereotypical ones. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. Sometimes it'll be a little bit of both. I generally try and keep to what I consider to be the easier disciplines. Magicians are more complex by their very nature.
Yeah.
So you pick them. Generally speaking, I would say, to talk about spellcasters, I would probably put illusionists last.
Fair.
In the group. It depends on what the adventure really is. If it's a game that's going to be dealing with more sort of social stuff as opposed to a typical dungeon crawl type thing, you want to make sure that you're making characters that can do the adventure that you have planned if you're going to do pre-gens. And that includes making sure that the talents that they have are appropriate, that they don't have a lot of dead weight in terms of skills or other abilities, that sort of thing. Generally, I would say avoid cavalrymen. I did a Windling cavalryman one year, and that was okay. If you're going to do a cavalryman, that's probably the only way that I would do that.
Mm-hmm.
I generally don't go with a menagerie beastmaster, which is to say I don't make the beastmaster with animal companions.
Yeah,
because that makes things a little bit more difficult. Generally, we'll have 2 heavy hitters. So I'll do like 2 magicians, 2 heavy hitters, and that means 2 out of warrior, swordmaster, sky raider.
Yeah.
I will typically have either a thief or a scout, depending on the type of adventure that it is.
Fair.
Troubadour, weaponsmith. Weaponsmith is actually a solid one to have. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, I generally do like 8 disciplines, 8 characters, and mix them up one with each name giver race. I'll sometimes do a classic pairing. I'll sometimes do something that's offbeat, like having an Obsidian spellcaster, for example, as opposed to an Obsidian warrior.
To Scrying archer or something.
But I mean, there is also something to be said for playing to type as well. Oh, archer. Yeah. I almost always have an archer as one of the choices because archers are just generally a really strong archetype that people are drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's almost always one of the selections that I have. But yeah, that's kind of the way that I approach it. Yeah, cavalryman is probably the only one that I would be least inclined toward. And then the other ones would depend a little bit on what I had in mind as far as the adventure storyline plot setting is going to be. You want to choose disciplines that are a little bit more appropriate to it.
Yeah. If this is going to be everyone's first time and you think you're going to be able to get them in from any other fantasy setting that they're used to, hit them with a little bit of the familiar, to your point, archer, warrior, so forth and so on. But then throw in the Earthdawn aspect of the troll that's a Strang, those races as well. So a little bit here and there is not a bad idea. And then I think what you also do is you lay them out and let people pick, right?
Yeah. I make up a dossier, actually, for each character that has a character sheet that's really just an Excel sheet where I just fill in all the info. And then I have a cover page that's got a picture of that name giver race. And then like a little description of, if it's a troll archer, then it'll have the picture of the troll. It'll say troll archer below it. And then there'll be like the introduction, like the two paragraph intro for that discipline from the player's guide.
Yeah.
Archers are blah, 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 whatever the text says.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be that. There'll be a character sheet, which I'll have kind of laid out so it's just on one page. And then I'll have like 3 or 4 pages, 2 to 3 to 4 pages that are basically a really kind of basic capsule summary of what all of the talents and skills that they have do.
Yeah, fair. Here's your write-up on...
I tend to simplify the mechanics slightly. If it's an archer and it's got a rank 3 true shot, I will have the description of true shot use specifically the fact that it's rank 3 just to fill in the figures there rather than have them kind of interpret them. And obviously for magicians, I also have spells with the spell info all picked out for them as well. Yeah,
you've already selected the spells that they have, because these are the ones that should be able to be used in the adventure, not some crap that is not going to be touched at all. He's got more questions about convention play, so here we go. The last half of this episode is all going to be about this stuff. What circle should I consider having the characters be? I think first circle will be too weak, and possibly too fatal to adequately introduce the game system, but I don't want to make the characters have all the bells and whistles of the higher circles either. Maybe fourth?
My starting characters, my pre-gens for conventions tend to be third circle.
Mm-hmm.
That tends to have given them enough of their additional abilities. I don't think that first is too weak. I just think that it doesn't necessarily give them enough toys to play with or have the steps necessarily be high enough to make things worthwhile. I don't think it's so much of a concern with survivability, but I'm a lot more familiar and balanced with that.
Fair.
But yeah, third circle, fourth circle, maybe a lot of what I do. If I know they're like third or fourth circle, then I know they've got a pretty good suite of abilities. They've got some decent survivability. They've got some variety and interesting stuff. There's the opportunity for some of the synergies of various talents to come into play.
Mm-hmm.
I do not go above fourth circle. I keep everybody in the novice tier. I think third is probably the sweet spot. Fourth is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to provide enough cool stuff for them to play with, but not overload people who are brand new to the system with too many options.
And I think the dice steps stay right in that sweet spot as well. The
dice steps tend to be, at that point, they tend to be like 8, 9, 10, depending on where you go.
Yeah.
Which means that when you start kicking in some of those boosting abilities, then you can get up to into those 3 dice steps.
Mm-hmm.
You get some cool stuff, and close enough where if they figure out some neat synergies between stuff, you could get some characters who are getting up into steps that actually do have D20s in them.
Yeah.
I think that's really nice. Yeah, third circle feels kind of like the sweet spot. Second circle, second, third circle, but yeah, third circle is kind of what I feel like the sweet spot is. I did one year do an advanced game where I had the characters were like 6th or 7th circle, but it was intentionally designed as you should be more familiar with the game if you are going to be playing in this. It is going to be a more difficult adventure, but for new players, yeah, second, third circle is probably fine.
Fair enough. Next question. Are there any good descriptions or possibly maps for the design and layout of kaers? If not, are there any dungeons or other subterranean maps from other systems that might be good to use?
There is in the Barsafe boxed set.
Yeah.
There's a really kind of like smallish kaer map that kind of gives you an idea of one example layout.
Mm-hmm. Ardanian's Revenge has a big kaer.
Yeah, Ardanian's Revenge has a kaer in it. It depends on if you're looking for something sort of smallish or if you're looking for something a little bit larger.
Yeah.
The Citadel in Mists of Betrayal is sort of supposed to be a ruined kaer, but it doesn't feel big enough even for a small community. Like, it doesn't have stuff in it that I feel would make sense for a sealed community to have. And I think that may be just part of the early design phase of things.
The only other one I can think of is the Tomb of King Runevere. But
yeah, that wasn't a kaer, though.
I know. That's why I needed to say that out loud to get it out of my head.
There's the ruins that show up in Shattered Pattern, but none of those are kaers.
Yeah.
Those are like ruined temples and other sort of things like that. Yeah, there really aren't a lot, and I can't think of anything offhand that would be able to substitute in easily as a kaer from other systems. I mean, we are going to have an episode coming up here in the next couple of weeks or so where we are going to be talking about kaers, and while we won't really necessarily be talking about mapping so much, we are going to talk about things that probably need to be considered when you are designing or creating a kaer of your own for an adventure.
You're not wrong.
So that's something to keep in mind. Maybe keep an ear out for that episode, and that may provide you some insights.
Yeah, it'll be there before episode 200. Promise.
I know that the map and layout for Kaer Synok from the Legends of Earthdawn podcast game was based on the map from Dungeon Module B4, The Lost City, from TSR, which is actually like a sort of pyramid.
Yeah. And
so that actually was used as a kaer, and I think it can work reasonably well for that.
Fair.
You know, a kaer is an underground community.
Yeah.
Town or small city or something like that within an enclosed environment. And so you need to think about everything that community is going to need and include it in some way, as opposed to a lot of dungeons that you get in other fantasy games that don't need to have that consideration because people can go outside. Yeah. That's the big thing when it comes to kaers compared to other types of ruins or dungeons, quote unquote, from other fantasy games, is that folks living in a dungeon or underground cave complex are likely to be able to go outside to get stuff to bring back to their home, as opposed to needing to do everything within that limited space.
Yeah. A kaer is an underground biosphere, so it has to be self-sufficient, self-sustaining, and a dungeon, air quotes, doesn't have to worry about that. That's just...
There should be an ecology, there should be an ecosystem of sorts for reasons of believability, verisimilitude.
Yeah.
Those are things that maybe you should keep in mind. I mean, you sort of need to answer the question, how do the people in this place eat? Where do they get their food and water and other resources?
Yeah.
And
in other cases, and in other cases, hey, look, there's a cave-in down that corridor. That answers that question of, well, the answer's behind that and you can't get to it, so move on.
Yeah.
So occasionally you have that. One of those things. Next question. My idea for the initial adventure is to start the characters out still locked up in their kaer, with the residents in a heated discussion about whether it is safe to come out. The characters can volunteer or get elected to be an advance party to check things out. I figured this would allow me to lean into the lack of knowledge the players may have about the setting, and allow me to introduce the devastation of the Scourge and other aspects of Barsave as they encounter them. Does this seem like a reasonable primer idea?
Yeah, it's not a bad one. I mean, again, going back to Ardanion's Revenge, that's sort of the premise of that, if you're playing it from inside the kaer, that the group is venturing out and you sort of have this expedition from the kaer itself through the caves up to the surface. So it is a perfectly valid approach for a starter adventure. And it does give you the advantage of not needing to necessarily lore dump a whole bunch of setting material. But I think I've said in the past that I don't think that that's necessarily needed beyond the sort of basic high concept of Earthdawn as a setting. Fair. You don't need to get into political history and relationships and stuff, except for where it matters in the adventure that you're running. But starting in a kaer does allow you to do the thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of D&D. Instead of going into the dungeon, you're starting inside and going out. So it's the twist on that ploy. I don't have a problem with that either. That's not a bad thing to do. For published materials, what would be some other good scenarios to run in a 4-hour convention setting?
Any of the Legends of Barsave adventures. Any one of those were originally developed for convention settings.
Yeah.
Even the, it's a little bit shorter, but even Masks of Fear, the adventure that's included in the Quick Start packet and is also included as the first adventure in the combined Legends Compendium Volume 1. Any of those would work. You could potentially get away with running if there are like low circle adventures in the Thrall Adventures, Parlength Adventures, Skypoint Adventures. The downside of those is that they tend to build on a certain amount of character knowledge in terms of what might be going on.
Fair.
You could look at the shards that were put out during the Red Brick era. A lot of those tend to be shorter, one-shot-ish type adventures.
Yeah, there's 8 shards in 2 different books.
I was going to say, some of them are adapted from the Thrall Adventures. Runvir's Tomb has a shard version of it. So yeah, there are a few things that you could do in there to provide a decent sort of one-shot convention scenario.
Yeah, and most of those pre-published adventures do say in the first couple of paragraphs it's written for this number of players and at this and so circle. So they will help guide you with kind of the level you're looking for. I've done a lot of those.
My games tend to sell out when I'm running them at Gen Con.
Well, you're Josh.
Our Earthdawn games just in general tend to sell out at Gen Con. It's not just me. I tend to prep, like I said earlier, I make 8 pre-gen characters. I kind of put 6 tickets up for sale. Mm-hmm. And then if we get walk-ins or whatever, I actually have 8 characters.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy about running that many, but I can do it.
Yeah.
If you are not as familiar running the game, then you may want to scale back slightly, like maybe plan for 4 and prep 6 characters or something like that.
Yeah.
Just to potentially give yourself a little bit more wiggle room. Obviously, you would need to take a look at any encounters that are in there to make sure they're sort of balanced out. But again, if you're doing pre-gens, you have the advantage of what the group's capabilities are likely to be and can plan your encounters appropriately.
Agreed. Lastly, what other advice do you have for Earthdawn convention play? Still loving the podcast. Keep up the great work. Scott.
Keep it relatively simple. For a convention play, players tend to be a lot more willing to follow tracks that are laid down because there is an understanding that you are there for this one session and you only have so much time. Mm-hmm. And so there's not necessarily going to be as much wandering around as you would, like, say, perhaps in a home game. Of course, that will depend in large part on the players at the table. So you obviously need to be willing to roll with the punches that come along there. Generally speaking, what I like to do, if we're talking about a 4-hour slot, I tend to do like 2 combat encounters. Mm-hmm. I tend to do one relatively early on that is fairly basic and straightforward because it gives the players, especially new ones, a chance to try out these characters and roll some dice and do some stuff.
Yeah.
Then I will typically have an investigation and or role-playing scenes that kind of take place sort of in the course of things. Maybe one of which might end up needing to be a minor fight or something, depending on how the group approaches it. And then I will generally have, like, the final scene will be a combat encounter of some sort.
Fair.
That's kind of like how I do it. I am also, again, very practiced at running convention games. But even then, I keep my convention stories relatively simple in terms of their outline and story progression.
Yeah.
Because that's easier. It is a lot easier to flesh something out a little bit more if you find it's going too quickly than it is to try and rush to get to the end if you are running long or have too much material.
So keep the plot kind of simple.
Yeah, like keep things relatively simple in terms of the story, like a follow the treasure map kind of thing.
Yeah.
I generally don't have more than 4 or 5 scenes in most of my convention scenarios.
Fair.
But yeah, keep things relatively simple. Have a couple of combat encounters.
And quick.
Keep one kind of brief. Early and relatively simple that just gives people a chance to roll some dice and try out their abilities. And then a more involved one towards the end. That would be sort of how I would approach it. And I think actually probably my biggest piece of advice especially if you are dealing with a bunch of new players, is to use the sort of option where you have extra successes and whatnot, modify the result rather than modify the step, because that makes things easier for everyone. And I will often they roll their attack and I'll say, okay, that is X number of successes, so you're going to get plus burp to the result of your damage.
Yeah.
I will sort of calculate that all in my head. And again, part of that just has to do with how familiar I am with the game and running it in convention scenarios. If you are not as practiced or familiar with it, you're going to want to be a little bit kinder with yourself and give yourself a little more room to deal with that.
Fair. The only thing I would suggest otherwise is I did convention play. Somebody else was running Earthdawn, and I showed up for that one a decade ago. The one thing he did to help out all the players was he printed up the dice chart and had that separated. Had that separated out, so each player had their own little dice chart to look at, so they knew what was going on. Just the last little tidbit.
Yeah, if you are going to give people the option to modify the step, you absolutely want to have a step table available. That's something that I try to include as part of the character packet.
Yeah.
But I don't always remember to do it because it's not part of the dossier files that I have pre-made already. Fair. One other thing that I would recommend, and this comes purely, I think, from a storyline, adventure, plot kind of thing, is to try and lean into story hooks or ideas that play into the more unique aspects of Earthdawn. Which is to say the horrors. My convention games tend to involve the horrors to some capacity. I had one that didn't actually involve the horrors, but involved a little bit of an expedition into the very edge of the Badlands to locate a temple to Rashomon, who is now Ragok. And so there is that mad passion, horror corrupted kind of feeling going on with it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a treasure map kind of thing where they were trying to find this place because supposedly this artifact was there. Like classic MacGuffin treasure hunt kind of thing.
Totally.
But yeah, I tend to lean into...
what makes Earthdawn Earthdawn.
Yeah, the things that kind of make Earthdawn Earthdawn.
Yeah, instead of just your typical fantasy sword and sorcery game. By all means, lean into that as you should.
Yeah.
Go sell the game.
Starting in a kaer is something that is automatically going to be notable when it comes to that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Point well taken. So, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode for you on our email palooza umpteen 20-something, whatever. So if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear more about your character death stories, as fun or not fun as they are. Please send them coming. This is a nice recurring theme I'm enjoying right at the moment. So until next time, go prep your con adventure. And Scott, if you're going to do it in Colorado, hit me up.
Good night, everybody.